Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? This time we're going way back to the book of Samuel,
Way back.
really focusing in on uh, one particular story
Okay.
about this young boy Samuel. And it's a moment that,
Oh, yeah.
like, changes everything for him.
Oh, wow.
It changes everything for Israel.
That's a good one. I like that story.
Yeah, so what I think is so fascinating about this is that it's ancient. Obviously, it's a really old story.
Sure.
But it speaks to these like really timeless themes that I think are relevant to all of us today. So we're talking about hearing the voice of God.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about the weight of prophecy.
Yeah.
And we're also talking about what happens when we ignore what we know is right.
Consequences.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so
Big time consequences.
big ton consequences. So like, imagine this. The word of the Lord was precious in those days.
Precious.
What does that even mean?
It means
It means that prophetic visions, direct communication with God, that was rare.
rare.
It was like a treasure, and people were, they hungered for that kind of guidance.
Absolutely. And this story unfolds. Where does it unfold? The temple of the Lord. You know, the most sacred spot in Israel where the Ark of the Covenant was kept.
Oh, wow.
But there's a problem.
Oh.
The lamp of God, which, you know, the symbol of God's presence,
Right.
is about to go out.
Whoa. Okay.
That's heavy symbolism right from the start.
It really is, yeah. It's
Like the setting itself is telling us something is off, that a change is coming. But before we get to that,
right.
let's meet our main players.
Yeah. Who are we dealing with here?
So we got Eli, the priest,
Okay.
and his eyesight is failing, which, you know, some people interpret that as a symbol of a deeper failing, you know.
A vision.
A vision
Yeah.
of leadership.
Right.
And his sons.
Oh.
Well, let's just say they're not exactly following in their father's footsteps.
They're not the best kids.
Not the best kids.
Yeah. They're corrupt. They're abusing their positions. And Eli hasn't done enough to stop them. I have a feeling this is going to come back to bite them later on.
It raises the questions about accountability, doesn't it? Even in spiritual matters, turning a blind eye
Yeah.
can have serious consequences.
For sure.
But amidst all of this, we have young Samuel serving in the temple, dedicated to God,
Okay.
but not yet knowing him in that deep, personal way.
Yeah. He's about to get a crash course, though.
He is?
This is where it gets really interesting. So it's nighttime.
Okay.
Samuel's asleep.
Right.
And suddenly he hears his name.
Oh, boy.
Samuel. Samuel.
Cookie.
He thinks it's Eli, right? He thinks Eli needs something.
Right.
But Eli's like, nope, wasn't me. Go back to sleep.
It's so creepy.
Can you imagine the confusion?
Yeah. And it happens again.
Right. Not once, not twice.
3 times.
3 times.
Yes.
Each time Samuel goes to Eli, each time Eli sends him back to bed. It's like this story is like pulling us in, and it's making us wonder, like, who's calling him?
Yeah.
It's like a thriller.
That's a good word.
Finally, it dawns on Eli, like, this is not just any voice. This is God calling Samuel.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
And Eli, despite his own failings, he like steps up in this moment and becomes this like unexpected mentor.
Interesting.
He tells Samuel, next time you hear the voice, say, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening."
Wow. Okay.
There's something really kind of poignant about that moment,
It is.
Eli is guiding Samuel towards this destiny, even though we know it's going to lead to his own downfall. Talk about mixed emotions.
That's heavy. So Samuel, a little terrified, but obedient,
Yeah?
lies down again.
Uh-huh.
And boom, that voice calls out, Samuel, Samuel. This time Samuel's ready.
He's ready.
Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. And what happens next is the kind of message that makes everyone's ears tingle, even thousands of years later.
Yeah, I mean, this is
it.
this is the turning point, not just for Samuel, but for Israel.
Yeah,
God reveals a message of judgment against Eli and his whole family.
a whole family.
Chills, right?
Yeah, and it's not just any judgment. It's a severe, sweeping condemnation because of the wickedness of Eli's sons and Eli's failure to rein them in. God says nothing can atone for their sins.
So we have little Samuel entrusted with this like earth-shattering prophecy.
Right.
And he's probably thinking, how am I supposed to tell Eli this?
Tough situation,
Right.
is it?
But Eli, he demands to know the truth. He says to Samuel, God do so to you and more also if you hide anything from me.
Oh, wow.
It's a moment that reveals Eli's character in a new light, I
Right.
think. Despite his shortcomings, he recognizes the authority of God.
Sure.
And he demands the truth, no matter how painful it might be. What do you think, listener? Is this a sign of courage or simply resignation?
It's a good question, and with a heavy heart, Samuel tells Eli everything.
Everything.
And how does Eli respond? He just says, "It is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him."
Yeah.
Talk about accepting your fate.
Yeah, it's a moment of profound resignation,
It is.
but also a recognition of power greater than himself.
Right, absolutely.
Eli understands that there are forces at play that even he, the priest, can't control. But you know what's really interesting is that despite this judgment, the story doesn't end in despair.
No, it doesn't.
No. Samuel grows up, and guess what? Everyone recognizes him as a prophet,
Wow.
chosen by God. He steps into this incredible role,
That's awesome.
and the Lord continues to appear to him, guiding him, speaking through him.
So we see the emergence of a new era with Samuel at the forefront, while the old order, represented by Eli and his sons, kind of fades away.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? If Eli had acted differently, if his sons had chosen a different path, would things have turned out differently?
It's a question worth pondering.
What do you think?
But for now, let's pause here and consider the weight of this prophecy. You know, it's a stark reminder that actions and inactions have consequences, even for those in positions of authority. What do you think, listener? What's the biggest takeaway from this part of the story?
It's a great point to ponder as we head into part 2. Stay tuned because we're going to dig deeper into that message itself, and we'll explore what it means to listen for God's voice, even in the midst of all the noise and chaos of our lives.
Welcome back. Let's unpack that prophecy against Eli and his house a bit more.
Yeah, that was pretty intense.
It's easy to read it as just this harsh judgment,
Right.
but there's more going on here.
I think you're right. It's not just a personal rebuke. It's like this condemnation of a whole family line.
The whole family line.
And the language is pretty strong, wouldn't you say?
Right,
Like,
yeah.
I will judge his house forever. The iniquity of Eli's house shall not be purged with sacrifice nor offering forever.
Forever.
Like, that's pretty heavy.
The wording really emphasizes the severity of the situation.
Yeah.
Like, there's this sense of permanence of
Right.
a line being crossed that can't be uncrossed. But to really understand this fully,
Yeah.
we need to look at the reasons behind the judgment.
Okay, so what exactly were Eli's sons doing that was so bad? The text says, like, they made themselves vile, but it doesn't give us all the gory details.
It doesn't.
Like, what were they up to?
Right, the specifics aren't spelled out here, but other passages in the book of Samuel
Okay.
tell us that they were abusing their priestly positions
Oh.
for personal gain, engaging in corrupt practices.
So they were not good guys.
Not good guys.
Basically treating the things of God with contempt.
Yeah, and I think
Like they had this incredible privilege,
they did.
this responsibility to serve God and the
Right.
people,
Absolutely.
and they just completely squandered it.
Exactly. And that's where Eli's failure comes in.
Right.
He knew about his son's wrongdoing,
Yeah.
but he didn't take decisive action to stop it. The text explicitly states that God's judgment falls on Eli's house for the iniquity which he knoweth, because his sons made themselves vile, and he restrained them not.
Wow. So it's not just their actions.
It's his inaction,
His
inaction.
That seals their fate. That's a key point. I mean, it raises the question of accountability, right?
Yeah.
Not just for our own choices, but for those under our care.
Absolutely.
I mean, whether we're parents, leaders, or just members of a community, we have a responsibility to speak up against wrongdoing,
Absolutely.
to try and set things right. Turning a blind eye, even in spiritual matters, has consequences.
It does.
What are your thoughts on this, listener? Have you ever been in a situation where you knew something was wrong, but you weren't sure how to address it?
That's a tough question.
It's a tough one.
And this story really makes you think about the weight of leadership.
It does.
But amidst all this heaviness, there's this incredible transformation happening with Samuel.
Right. He goes from being a sleepy kid to a prophet,
Yeah.
like almost overnight. Why does that
Overnight.
even happen?
Well, it's not quite as instantaneous as it seems.
Okay.
The text says, Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and did let none of his words fall to the ground. So it suggests a process of growth, of Samuel consistently proving himself faithful and obedient to God's guidance.
So it's not just one encounter,
No.
but a lifetime of walking with God, of earning that trust and authority.
Exactly. And the result, all Israel, from Dan even to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was established to be a prophet of the Lord.
Wow.
His faithfulness, his willingness to listen and obey,
Yeah.
leads him to become a national figure,
Wow.
a leader respected for his connection to the divine.
It's amazing how this story takes us on such a journey. We start with Eli, this aging priest whose leadership is failing,
Yeah.
and we end with Samuel, this young prophet rising to prominence
Yeah.
It's like a passing of the torch, wouldn't you say?
It is, and it raises an important question for us today. Whose voices are we listening to? Are we seeking guidance from sources that are trustworthy,
Oh, that's good.
that align with our values?
Yeah.
Or are we allowing ourselves to be swayed by voices that may not have our best interests at heart?
You know, when you put it that way, it makes me think about how we're constantly bombarded with messages today. Oh, yeah. I mean, from the news, social media, even for friends and family.
Right.
Everyone seems to have an opinion, a piece of advice, like a hot take.
A hot take.
It can be really overwhelming.
It's a lot to process.
It really is.
It really is.
And amidst all that noise, how do we develop that discernment,
Right.
that ability to separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak?
How do we know which voices are leading us toward truth
Yeah.
and which ones are leading us astray?
That's the million-dollar question.
Is.
And I don't think there's a simple one-size-fits-all answer.
I don't either.
But I do think the story of Samuel offers us some valuable clues.
Yeah.
Remember how Eli, despite his own failings, guided Samuel to listen and obey. He became a mentor, a trusted source of wisdom in this really confusing and overwhelming situation.
He did. He did.
So maybe one key to developing discernment is finding those mentors, those trusted guides who can help us navigate
Yeah.
the complexities of life and make wise choices.
I think so.
But those mentors don't just magically appear, do they?
No, I don't.
It takes effort on our part to seek them out,
Absolutely.
to cultivate those relationships, and to be open to their guidance.
To be open.
But it's not just about external mentors, is it?
Yeah.
There's also that inner voice, that intuition,
Right.
that gut feeling that can guide us if we learn to listen to it.
Absolutely.
But sometimes that inner voice is so faint,
It is.
so easily drowned out by all the external noise.
It's true. And that's where practices like meditation,
Yeah.
prayer, or simply spending time in nature can be so valuable.
Yeah, I think you're right.
You know, they help us to quiet our minds, tune out the distractions,
Yeah.
and create space for that inner voice to emerge.
Like we have to become our own inner prophets,
Mm-hmm.
constantly discerning the messages that are leading us towards our highest good
I love that.
and those that are leading us astray.
And just like Samuel's journey, it
Right.
wasn't instantaneous.
It took time.
Developing this kind of discernment takes time,
Yeah.
practice, and a willingness to be honest with ourselves.
So it's an ongoing process,
It is.
a lifelong journey of listening, learning, and refining our ability to distinguish between the voices that lead us towards light and those that keep us in the shadows.
Beautifully put.
Oh, thanks.
And perhaps that's the most important takeaway from the calling of Samuel. The reminder that we're all called, each in our own unique way, to live a life of purpose and meaning.
Yeah.
The challenge is to cultivate the awareness
Right.
and the courage to listen to the voices that guide us towards that calling.
And to remember that even when we mess up,
We do.
even when we make mistakes,
Yeah,
there's always that possibility of course correction.
absolutely.
Just like Eli eventually accepted God's judgment,
Mhm.
we too can choose to learn from our missteps and realign ourselves with our truest path.
Indeed. This story, like all great stories, offers a timeless mirror to reflect on our own lives.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I encourage you to take some time to reflect on the voices you're listening to,
Yeah.
both external and internal. Which ones are guiding you toward your highest potential? Which ones might be holding you back? And what steps can you take to align yourself more fully with the whispers of wisdom that lead you towards a life of purpose, meaning, and joy?
Until next time, keep diving deep, and may your journey be filled with clarity, courage, and the unwavering guidance of your own inner compass.
You know that question you asked last time?
Oh, yeah.
About, like, if God were to speak to you directly,
Mm-hmm.
would you be ready to listen?
Right.
It's been kind of swirling in my mind ever since.
That's a big one.
It is. It's easy to say yes.
Yeah.
But then when you think about the potential consequences,
Sure.
like the sacrifices involved,
It gets complicated.
it gets a lot more complicated.
It does, doesn't it? And that's precisely why the story of Samuel is so powerful. It's not just this feel-good tale of a boy who hears God's voice and everything works out perfectly. It's a story about wrestling with difficult truths, facing the consequences of choices, both good and bad,
Yeah.
and ultimately choosing to trust in something bigger than ourselves, even when it's hard.
You know, one thing that really struck me about this whole deep dive
Yeah,
is how relevant it feels to our lives today.
I agree.
I mean, we may not be hearing voices in the night like Samuel,
Right.
But we are constantly bombarded with messages,
Absolute.
opinions, influences. It's like that cacophony you were talking about.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. We have the 24-hour news cycle, social media feeds overflowing with opinions, and everyone from celebrities to self-proclaimed experts telling us what to think and believe.
Right. It's a lot.
It's a lot to process.
It really is. So amidst all that noise,
Yeah.
how do we develop that discernment,
Right.
that ability to
Yeah.
separate the wheat from the chaff,
How do we know
so to speak?
which voices are leading us toward truth and which ones are leading us astray?
That is the million-dollar question.
It is a big one.
And I don't think there's a simple one-size-fits-all answer.
No, there's not.
But I do think that the story of Samuel offers us some valuable clues. Remember how Eli, despite his own failings, guided Samuel to listen and obey? He became a mentor,
Right.
a trusted source of wisdom
Yeah.
in this really confusing and overwhelming situation.
A confusing situation for sure.
Yeah. So maybe one key to developing discernment is finding those mentors, those trusted guides
Yeah.
who can help us navigate the complexities of life
Sure.
and make wise choices.
Finding those mentors is key.
But those mentors don't just magically appear, do they?
No, they don't. It takes effort on our part to seek them out,
Yeah.
to cultivate those relationships,
Yeah.
to be open to their guidance.
But it's not just about external mentors, is it?
No, it's not.
There's also that inner voice, that intuition, that gut feeling that can guide us if we learn to listen to it.
Absolutely.
But sometimes that inner voice is so faint,
Yeah, it can be.
so easily drowned out by all the external noise.
It's true. And that's where practices like meditation, prayer,
Yeah.
or simply spending time in nature
Oh, for sure.
can be so valuable. They help us quiet our minds, tune out the distractions, and create space for that inner voice to emerge.
It's like we have to become our own inner prophets,
I'd love that.
constantly discerning the messages that are leading us towards our highest good
Absolutely.
and those that are leading us astray.
Yeah, and just like Samuel's journey wasn't instantaneous,
Right.
developing this kind of discernment takes time, practice,
Yeah.
and a willingness to be honest with ourselves.
It's an ongoing process.
It is.
It's a lifelong journey of listening,
Yes.
learning,
Mm-hmm.
and refining our ability to distinguish between the voices that lead us toward light and those that keep us in the shadows.
Beautifully put. And perhaps that's the most important takeaway from the calling of Samuel. The reminder that we're all called, each in our own unique way, to live a life of purpose and meaning.
Yeah.
The challenge is to cultivate the awareness and the courage to listen to the voices that guide us towards that calling.
And to remember that even when we mess up, even when we make mistakes, there's always the possibility of course correction.
Always.
Just like Eli eventually accepted God's judgment, we too can choose to learn from our missteps and realign ourselves with our truest path.
Absolutely. So much wisdom in this story.
So much. And I think it's one of those stories that the more you dig into it,
Right.
the more you get out of it.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like an onion.
Layers.
So many layers.
So many layers.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to encourage you